The science behind mind-to-mind connection. Have you ever thought of someone, and seconds later they called you? What if that wasn't coincidence? What if your brain can communicate without words? Tonight, we're diving into the science, psychology, and mysteries of telepathy, and what modern research is quietly discovering. Before we begin, I want you to do something. Think back to a moment when you knew something was wrong with someone you loved before they told you, or when you and a friend said the exact same thing at the exact same time. Comment below if you've experienced this, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why these moments happen more than you think. Part 1. What is telepathy? The relatable entry. Let's start with something simple. Telepathy, at its core, is the idea that minds can communicate without using the traditional 5 senses. No words, no gestures, no signals, just knowing. Now I know what you're thinking. That sounds like science fiction. But before you dismiss it, let me ask you this. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the tension, even though no one said a word? Have you ever felt someone staring at you from across the room, turned around, and they were? Have you ever reached for your phone to text someone, and at that exact moment, they texted you? These aren't just random occurrences. There's something deeper happening here. Let me give you some everyday examples that you've probably experienced. The phone call phenomenon. You're thinking about an old friend you haven't spoken to in months. Your mind wanders to memories you shared, conversations you had. Then, out of nowhere, your phone rings. It's them. This happens so often that most people have a story like this. Twin connection. Twins, especially identical twins, report knowing when their sibling is in pain or danger, even when they're miles apart. One twin breaks their arm, the other feels a sharp pain in the same spot at the same moment. Coincidence? Maybe, but it happens with such frequency that it demands investigation. The staring detection. You're reading a book in a coffee shop. Suddenly, you get an unmistakable feeling that someone is watching you. You look up, and there they are, eyes locked on you. How did you know? No one touched you. No one made a sound, yet somehow you knew. Finishing each other's sentences. You're talking with someone close to you, a partner, a best friend, a sibling. They start a sentence, and you finish it. Not because you're trying to, but because you both arrived at the same thought at the same moment. Your brains synchronized. The mother's intuition. A mother wakes up in the middle of the night with an overwhelming sense that something is wrong with her child who's away at college. She calls. Her child picks up, crying in the middle of a crisis. She couldn't have known, but somehow she did. Now here's where it gets interesting. Science has tried to explain these experiences away as coincidence, pattern recognition, or confirmation bias. And in many cases, that's exactly what they are. But not always. Sometimes the experiences are too specific, too accurate, too immediate to be written off so easily. So what's really happening here? Is there something our brains are doing that we don't fully understand? Can information really transfer from one mind to another without physical signals? That's what we're going to explore tonight. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at your own mind the same way again. Part 2. The history of telepathy, ancient wisdom to modern mystery. To understand telepathy, we need to go back, way back, because the idea that minds can connect isn't new, it's ancient. Ancient civilizations and mind connection. In ancient Egypt, priests believed they could communicate with the gods and with each other through pure thought. They practiced rituals designed to quiet the mind and open channels of psychic communication. These weren't seen as supernatural powers. They were considered natural human abilities that required training and discipline. The ancient Greeks had a concept called nous, a form of direct knowing that bypassed the senses. Plato wrote about forms of knowledge that came not through observation, but through direct mental perception. Aristotle explored the idea that minds could influence each other at a distance. In ancient India, the yogis and sages spoke of siddhis, supernatural abilities that arose from deep meditation and spiritual practice. Among these was telepathy, or mind reading, which they called parasiddhijnana in Sanskrit. But they didn't see this as magic. They understood it as a refinement of consciousness, a tuning of the mind to frequencies others couldn't perceive. Indigenous cultures around the world have their own traditions of mind-to-mind communication. Aboriginal Australians speak of dadiri, a deep, spiritual act of listening that goes beyond words. Native American shamans were said to communicate across vast distances through vision and intention. African tribes practiced forms of collective consciousness where the boundaries between individual minds seemed to blur. The spiritual interpretation. For most of human history, telepathy wasn't questioned. It was simply accepted as part of the human experience. It was woven into spirituality, religion, and daily life. Prayer itself is a form of believed telepathic communication with the divine. The idea that thoughts could travel, that consciousness could extend beyond the physical body, was fundamental to how people understood reality. But then something changed. The scientific revolution and the dismissal. When the scientific revolution arrived in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Western world began to view the mind differently. Descartes separated mind and body. The brain became a machine. Consciousness became a byproduct of neural activity, and anything that couldn't be measured, tested, and replicated was dismissed as superstition. Telepathy was relegated to the realm of pseudoscience. It became something only con artists, mystics, and the delusional believed in. Scientists who dared to study it risked their careers and reputations. But here's the thing, the experiences didn't stop. People kept reporting these moments of inexplicable connection. The anecdotes piled up, and eventually, some scientists couldn't ignore it anymore. The birth of parapsychology. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, a new field emerged, parapsychology. Researchers like Frederick Myers, William James, and J.B. Rhine began studying telepathy, clairvoyance, and other psychic phenomena using scientific methods. They wanted to know if these experiences could be real. J.B. Rhine, working at Duke University in the 1930s, conducted thousands of experiments using Zener cards, simple cards with symbols like stars, circles, and waves. Participants would try to send the image they were looking at to another person in a different room, who would try to receive it and guess which card it was. The results were controversial. Some participants scored significantly above chance, odds so low that they couldn't be easily explained by luck alone. But skeptics pointed out problems with the experimental design, potential for cheating, and the difficulty of replicating results. Still, the research continued. Because even if most cases were explainable, even if only 1% were genuine, that 1% would revolutionize our understanding of consciousness. Why humans believed in mind-to-mind communication. But let's step back and ask a deeper question. Why did humans across every culture, every continent, every time period believe in telepathy? The answer might be simpler than you think, because they experienced it. Before modern technology, before instant communication, humans relied heavily on subtle cues, emotional attunement, and deep interpersonal bonds for survival. A mother needed to know when her child was in danger. A hunter needed to coordinate silently with his group. Communities needed to sense threats and opportunities without always having time for words. These abilities weren't supernatural. They were survival mechanisms. And perhaps, in our modern world of constant noise and distraction, we've simply lost touch with capacities that were once commonplace. Later in this video, I'll share the one experiment that made scientists deeply uncomfortable, an experiment that suggested our brains might be far more connected than we ever imagined. But first, we need to understand what's actually happening in your brain when these moments occur. Part 3, the brain and telepathy, the scientific foundation. Now let's talk about what's actually happening inside your skull. Because whether you believe in telepathy or not, your brain is doing things right now that science is only beginning to understand. Brain waves, the language of the mind. Your brain operates on electricity. Right now, billions of neurons are firing, creating waves of electrical activity that pulse through your brain in rhythmic patterns. We call these brain waves, and they come in different frequencies. Beta waves, 14 to 30 Hz, are what you're in right now. Alert, focused, thinking consciously. Alpha waves, 8 to 13 Hz, appear when you're relaxed, daydreaming in a meditative state. Theta waves, 4 to 8 Hz, dominate during deep meditation, light sleep, and the twilight state between waking and sleeping. Delta waves, 0.5 to 4 Hz, emerge during deep, dreamless sleep. Here's what's fascinating. When two people are deeply connected, their brain waves can synchronize. Scientists have measured this. When a mother and child interact, their brain waves align. When musicians play together, their neural activity coordinates. When couples sit in silence together, their brainwave patterns begin to mirror each other. This phenomenon is called neural synchrony, and it suggests that our brains aren't isolated islands. They're constantly responding to and influencing the brains around them. Mirror neurons, the empathy network. In the 1990s, Italian neuroscientists made a stunning discovery. They were studying the brains of macaque monkeys, looking at which neurons fired when the monkeys performed actions like grabbing food. One day, a researcher reached for a peanut while a monkey was watching. The monkey's neurons fired, the same neurons that would have fired if the monkey itself had grabbed the peanut. The monkey's brain was mirroring the researcher's action. They called these mirror neurons, and humans have them too. In fact, we have a highly developed mirror neuron system that allows us to automatically simulate the experiences of others. When you watch someone in pain, your pain centers activate. When you see someone smile, your smile muscles engage, even if you don't actually smile. This is the biological basis of empathy. But it's more than that. It's evidence that our brains are constantly modeling and predicting the internal states of people around us. We're not just observing behavior, we're unconsciously recreating the mental and emotional experiences of others inside our own minds. Could this be a form of telepathy? Not in the science fiction sense, but in a very real sense. Your brain is accessing information about someone else's internal state without them telling you verbally. Emotional synchronization, feeling what others feel. Let's go deeper. Research has shown that emotions are contagious, not metaphorically, literally. When you're in the presence of someone who's anxious, your stress hormones rise. When you're with someone who's calm, your nervous system regulates. This happens automatically, below the level of conscious awareness. There's a phenomenon called limbic resonance, the capacity of mammals to sense and respond to the emotional states of others through subtle physiological cues. Your heart rate, breathing pattern, body temperature, and even your hormone levels can influence and be influenced by the people around you. Mothers and infants are particularly attuned. Studies show that a mother's heartbeat can regulate a baby's heart rate. Her breathing pattern can calm or agitate the child. Their nervous systems are linked in ways that go beyond simple observation. Couples who have been together for decades report knowing when their partner is upset, even when they're in different rooms or different cities. They can feel when something is wrong. This isn't magic, it's deep emotional attunement developed over years of intimate connection. Subconscious pattern recognition. Your brain knows before you do. Here's something that will blow your mind. Your subconscious processes about 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind, about 40 bits per second. That means 99.999% of what your brain is doing is happening below your conscious awareness. Your subconscious is constantly scanning your environment, picking up on microexpressions, subtle changes in body language, shifts in tone, patterns in behavior, things your conscious mind would never notice. When you have a gut feeling about someone, that's your subconscious signaling to your conscious mind that it's detected something important. It's not psychic. It's pattern recognition operating at a level too fast and too complex for you to articulate. This explains many telepathic experiences. Your friend is acting normally, saying they're fine, but something in their tone, their posture, the timing of their words tells your subconscious that they're lying. You know they're upset before they tell you because your brain already picked up on 100 microsignals that something was wrong. Quantum entanglement and consciousness, the controversial frontier. Now, I'm going to mention something that makes many scientists uncomfortable: quantum mechanics. At the quantum level, particles can become entangled, linked in such a way that measuring one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance, and he didn't like it. But it's real. It's been proven in laboratories around the world. Some researchers have speculated, and I emphasize speculated, that consciousness might have quantum properties. That perhaps, at some fundamental level, human minds can become entangled the way particles do. This is highly controversial. Most neuroscientists dismiss it, but a small number of physicists and consciousness researchers take it seriously. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff proposed a theory called orchestrated objective reduction, suggesting that consciousness arises from quantum processes in microtubules within neurons. If true, it would mean consciousness isn't just a product of neurons firing. It's connected to the quantum fabric of reality itself. Could entangled minds explain telepathy? Maybe. Probably not. But the fact that serious scientists are even asking the question tells you how little we truly understand about consciousness. The information transfer problem. Here's the central question. Can information transfer from one brain to another without any physical medium? Traditional neuroscience says no. Information needs a carrier: sound waves, light waves, chemical signals. Telepathy, in the classic sense, would require some unknown mechanism of information transfer. But what if the information isn't being transferred? What if both minds are accessing the same information field, pulling from a shared pool of data? What if consciousness isn't generated by the brain, but received by it, the way a radio receives signals? These are questions that push the boundaries of science. Most researchers won't touch them, but a few are brave enough to explore. Later in this video, I'll show you the experiment that suggested our brains might actually be doing something science can't yet explain. But first, let me tell you about the famous studies that tried to prove telepathy was real, and why they sparked decades of controversy. Part 4. Famous Telepathy Experiments, when science got strange. Throughout the 20th century, scientists conducted thousands of experiments trying to prove or disprove telepathy. Some results were dismissed, others were celebrated, and a few made people very uncomfortable. The Gonsfeld experiments: sensory deprivation and mind reading. In the 1970s, parapsychologists developed a protocol called the Gonsfeld experiment. The name comes from the German word for whole field, and the idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Here's how it worked. A participant, the receiver, would sit in a comfortable chair in a soundproof room. Halves of ping-pong balls were placed over their eyes, with a red light shining on them to create a uniform visual field. White noise played through headphones. The goal was to create sensory deprivation, reducing external stimuli so the mind could become more receptive to internal signals. In another room, a sender would look at a randomly selected image, maybe a photograph of a beach or a painting of a cathedral, and try to mentally transmit it to the receiver. After 20 to 30 minutes, the receiver would describe any images, feelings, or impressions that came to them. Then they'd be shown 4 images. 1 was the actual target, 3 were decoys, and asked to choose which one they thought the sender had been focusing on. By chance alone, they should be right 25% of the time. But that's not what happened. A meta-analysis of 29 Gonsfeld studies, published in 1985 by psychologist Charles Honorton, found a hit rate of 38%, significantly above chance. The odds of this happening by luck alone were calculated at 1 in a billion. Skeptics attacked the methodology. They said there were flaws in how the studies were conducted. Possibilities of sensory leakage, subtle cues the receiver might pick up through sound or smell. So researchers tightened the protocols. They conducted the experiments in completely isolated facilities. They used automated systems to select targets. They brought in skeptical observers. And still, the results held. Not always, not in every lab, but often enough that it couldn't be dismissed as pure chance. In 1994, psychologists Darrell Bem and Charles Onorton published results from what they called Otto-Gansfeld experiments, completely computer-controlled, with zero possibility of human error or cheating. The results showed a 32% hit rate, still significantly above chance. The scientific community was divided. Some researchers saw this as evidence that something real was happening. Others insisted the results were the product of subtle statistical artifacts, publication bias, or flawed methodology that hadn't been fully eliminated. The dream telepathy experiments. In the 1960s and 70s, researchers at the Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn conducted a series of experiments exploring whether telepathy could occur during dreams. The protocol was simple but rigorous. A participant would sleep in a soundproof, electrically shielded room while connected to an EEG machine that monitored their brain waves. When the machine detected REM sleep, the stage where vivid dreaming occurs, a researcher in another building would randomly select an image and attempt to send it to the dreamer. The sleeper would be awakened during or just after REM sleep and asked to describe their dreams. Independent judges, who had no knowledge of which image had been selected, would then compare the dream reports to the target images to see if there were matches. Over hundreds of trials, the results were startling. The correspondence between target images and dream content was far greater than chance would predict. Dreamers would report incredibly specific details that matched the image being sent to them. In one famous case, the target image was The Sacrament of the Last Supper by Salvador Dali. The sleeper reported dreaming about a group of people sitting around a table, like a banquet or a dinner party. There was a feeling of something sacred or religious. Coincidence? Maybe, but it happened repeatedly. Malcolm Besant, one of the most successful participants, achieved results so consistent that skeptics accused the researchers of fraud. No evidence of fraud was ever found. The U.S. government's secret telepathy research. Now, let's talk about something most people don't know. The U.S. government spent decades researching telepathy and other psychic phenomena. It started during the Cold War. Intelligence agencies heard rumors that the Soviet Union was conducting psychic espionage research. Worried about falling behind, the CIA, DIA, and other agencies launched their own programs. The most famous was Project Stargate, which ran from the 1970s to 1995. The goal was to see if remote viewing, a form of clairvoyance where a person describes a distant location they've never seen, could be used for intelligence gathering. Now, remote viewing isn't quite telepathy, but it's closely related. It's the idea that consciousness can access information non-locally, without physical proximity. The project recruited psychics, trained military personnel, and conducted thousands of sessions. Some of the results were impressive. Viewers described Soviet military installations with uncanny accuracy. They identified the locations of hostages, missing aircraft, and hidden facilities. Skeptics point out that for every hit, there were dozens of misses. That's true, but intelligence agencies continued funding the research for 20 years. They wouldn't have done that if it was completely useless. When the program was declassified in 1995, the official conclusion was that remote viewing showed some evidence of anomalous cognition, but not enough to be operationally useful. Which is a very careful way of saying, something seems to be happening here, but we don't know what, and we can't control it reliably. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. From 1979 to 2007, Princeton University ran a research lab called PAIR, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. It was headed by Robert John, the former dean of engineering, and manager Brenda Dunn. Their experiments focused on whether human consciousness could influence random physical systems, but they also studied telepathy, which they called remote perception. In their remote perception experiments, one person, the agent, would visit a random location at a specific time. Another person, the percipient, would sit in a lab and try to describe where the agent was. Over 336 formal trials conducted over several years, They found statistically significant correlations between the percipient's descriptions and the actual locations. The effect was small, but it was consistent. Princeton University eventually shut down the lab, not because of fraud or bad science, but because the results were too controversial. Funding dried up. Mainstream scientists didn't want to be associated with it. But the data is still there, published, peer-reviewed, and it still shows effects that shouldn't exist if consciousness is confined to the brain. Why scientists are divided. So why isn't this stuff accepted by mainstream science? Because replication is inconsistent. Some labs get positive results, others don't. And in science, if an effect can't be reliably reproduced, it's considered suspect. There's also the file drawer problem. Studies that show no effect are less likely to be published, which means positive results might be overrepresented in the literature. And then there's the fact that telepathy violates our understanding of physics. There's no known mechanism, no carrier wave, no explanation for how information could travel from one mind to another without physical contact. But here's the thing. The absence of a mechanism doesn't mean the phenomenon doesn't exist. We used gravity for thousands of years before we understood it. We used electricity before we knew what it was. Sometimes the data comes first and the explanation comes later. And the data, controversial as it is, keeps pointing to something. Later, I'll share the one study that made even hardcore skeptics pause. But first, let me tell you about something that's far more common and far more powerful than laboratory telepathy: emotional telepathy. The kind that happens between people who love each other. Part 5. Emotional telepathy, the bond that transcends words. Let's move away from laboratories and government programs for a moment and talk about something you've probably experienced firsthand: emotional telepathy. The kind that happens not in controlled settings with random strangers, but between people who are deeply connected. Because here's what researchers have found. If telepathy exists in any meaningful form, it happens most powerfully between people who share deep emotional bonds. The mother-child connection. Every mother has stories. Stories of waking up in the middle of the night, seconds before their baby cries. Stories of knowing their child is sick before any symptoms appear. Stories of feeling an inexplicable panic, only to discover their child was in danger at that exact moment. Science has tried to explain this as heightened vigilance, subconscious pattern recognition, or confirmation bias. And sometimes that's exactly what it is. But sometimes the timing is too precise, the information too specific. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, a controversial but highly credentialed biologist, conducted surveys of thousands of mothers and found that a significant percentage reported accurate premonitions or intuitions about their children's well-being, even when separated by great distances. In one documented case, a mother in California woke at 3:42 a.m. with an overwhelming certainty that her daughter, who was traveling in Europe, was in danger. She tried calling but couldn't reach her. Hours later, she discovered her daughter had been in a serious car accident in France at 12:42 p.m. local time, which was exactly 3:42 a.m. in California. Skeptics would say this is selection bias. We remember the hits and forget the misses. And they're right that our memories are unreliable. But even accounting for that, the frequency of these reports is striking. From a biological standpoint, this makes sense. For millions of years, a mother's ability to sense her child's distress, even at a distance, would have had enormous survival value. Natural selection would favor mothers who could detect danger to their offspring. Perhaps we evolved sensitivity that goes beyond the 5 senses. Why couples sync emotionally. If you've been in a long-term relationship, you know what I'm talking about. You can feel when your partner is upset, even when they're smiling. You know when something is wrong before they say a word. You can sense their mood from across the room. This isn't magic, it's neurological attunement. Research by psychologist James Cohn at the University of Virginia showed that when romantic partners hold hands, their brain waves and heart rates synchronize. When one partner experiences pain, the other's brain responds as if they're experiencing it too. The longer the relationship, the stronger the synchronization. Couples who have been together for decades develop what researchers call emotional telepathy, an ability to accurately predict and respond to each other's emotional states with remarkable accuracy. In studies where partners were asked to identify emotions from their spouse's facial expressions, long-term couples scored significantly higher than strangers. But it goes deeper than reading expressions. Couples report knowing when their partner is thinking about them, feeling sudden sadness or anxiety that turns out to match what their partner was experiencing at that moment, having the same dream on the same night. These experiences are common, so common that researchers have had to take them seriously. Dr. Dean Radin, chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, conducted experiments where couples were separated into different rooms. One partner was shown emotionally arousing images, while the other partner's physiological responses were measured. The results showed that the partner who wasn't viewing the images showed measurable changes in skin conductance and heart rate at the exact moments the other partner was shown disturbing images. The effect was small, but it was real, and it was statistically significant. Why trauma and bonding increase telepathic experiences? Here's something darker, but important. People who have experienced trauma together report higher rates of telepathic-like experiences. Soldiers who served in combat together, survivors of natural disasters, people who went through abuse or captivity, they often describe knowing when their fellow survivors are in distress, even years later and miles apart. Psychologists explain this as hypervigilance. Trauma rewires the brain to be constantly alert for danger, and part of that alertness involves monitoring the emotional states of others. But survivors insist it's more than that. They describe a bond that goes beyond psychology, a connection that feels like their nervous systems are permanently linked. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. In life-or-death situations, the ability to coordinate without speaking, to sense danger through each other, would dramatically increase survival odds. Groups that could communicate this way would outlive groups that couldn't. Twin studies, the ultimate test. Identical twins are the gold standard for studying telepathic phenomena because they share the same genetic code and often the same environment growing up. And the reports are remarkable. Dr. Guy Lyon Playfair documented dozens of cases where twins reported simultaneous experiences despite being separated. Twins who fell and broke bones in the same location at the same time. Twins who woke from identical nightmares at the same moment. Twins who called each other simultaneously to say the same thing. Twins who felt pain when their sibling was injured, even when they didn't know about the injury. In controlled experiments, some twin pairs have demonstrated the ability to influence each other's physiological states. When one twin's hand was placed in ice water, the other twin, in a different room with no knowledge of what was happening, showed changes in heart rate and skin temperature. Not all twins report these experiences, and not all reported experiences hold up under laboratory conditions. But the consistency of the reports, across cultures and throughout history, suggests something real is happening. The psychology of deep connection. Psychologist Arthur Aaron studied what happens when people form deep, rapid connections. He developed a protocol, 36 questions designed to accelerate intimacy, and found that after sharing vulnerabilities and personal stories, participants' physiological responses began to synchronize. Their breathing patterns aligned, their heart rates coordinated, their microexpressions mirrored each other. This happened within hours of meeting. Now imagine what happens after years, after decades, after a lifetime of sharing the same space, the same experiences, the same emotional landscape. Your nervous systems become entrained. Your brains learn to predict each other with extraordinary accuracy. The boundary between where one person ends and another begins starts to blur, not metaphorically, but neurologically. Is this telepathy? It depends on how you define the word. If telepathy means mind reading in the Hollywood sense, hearing someone's thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken, then no, this isn't telepathy. But if telepathy means direct access to another person's emotional and mental state without verbal communication, then yes, this might be the closest thing to real telepathy that exists. Grief and connection beyond death. I want to mention something that's even more controversial: experiences of connection after death. Many people report feeling the presence of loved ones who have died, sensing them in the room, receiving messages or signs, having dreams that feel more real than normal dreams. Science dismisses these as grief hallucinations, the brain's way of processing loss. And in many cases, that's exactly what they are. But some experiences are harder to explain. Widows who wake up knowing something important, then discover it's true. Children who describe conversations with deceased grandparents they never met, recounting details they couldn't have known. I'm not making any claims here. I'm simply telling you what people report and what a small number of researchers have tried to study. The point is this: emotional bonds create connections that science is only beginning to understand. And whether you call it telepathy, emotional attunement, or something else entirely, the phenomenon is real, measurable, and profound. Later, I'll tell you about the experiment that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about separated minds. But first, let's address the question skeptics always ask: isn't this all just coincidence? Part 6, Coincidence or Telepathy, the skeptic's case. Let's be honest. Most telepathic experiences can be explained without invoking anything supernatural. And it's important we acknowledge that, because if we're going to take this seriously, we need to understand where the legitimate science ends and where wishful thinking begins. So let's talk about why your brain might be tricking you into thinking telepathy is real. The brain's pattern-seeking nature. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. It has to be. That's how you survived as a species. The human who saw a pattern in the rustling grass and assumed it might be a predator lived longer than the human who assumed it was just wind. This tendency is called apophenia, seeing meaningful patterns in random data. And your brain does this constantly, automatically, without your conscious control. When you think of someone and they call you 5 minutes later, your brain registers this as significant. It feels meaningful. It feels like cause and effect. But here's what you don't register: all the times you thought of someone and they didn't call. All the times someone called you and you weren't thinking of them. All the times you thought of dozens of people throughout the day and only one of them happened to reach out. If you think about 10 people every day, and each of those people has a 1% chance of contacting you on any given day, you'd expect a telepathic coincidence about once every 10 days. Over a year, that's 36 seemingly psychic moments. Your brain remembers those 36 and forgets the other 329 days when nothing happened. This is why anecdotal evidence, no matter how compelling it feels, isn't scientifically reliable. Confirmation bias, seeing what you want to see. Confirmation bias is the tendency to notice and remember information that confirms what you already believe, while ignoring or forgetting information that contradicts it. If you believe in telepathy, you'll pay attention to moments that seem telepathic. You'll invest them with meaning. You'll tell stories about them. If you don't believe in telepathy, you'll dismiss those same moments as coincidence and move on. Both people are experiencing the same reality, but they're filtering it through different belief systems. Studies have shown that people who believe in psychic phenomena are significantly more likely to report experiencing them. That doesn't mean the experiences aren't real, but it does suggest that belief shapes perception. The law of large numbers. Here's a statistical reality. If something has even a tiny probability of happening, and you give it enough opportunities, it will eventually happen. You know about 7 billion people on this planet. Every single one of them is thinking about people throughout the day. They're calling people, texting people, running into people. With trillions of social interactions happening every day, the odds that some of them will line up in seemingly impossible ways is actually quite high. Someone, somewhere, today had a dream about a person they haven't thought about in years. And that person called them the next day. It feels miraculous to them, but multiply that probability by billions of people, and it's statistically inevitable. It's the same principle behind winning the lottery. The odds of you specifically winning are astronomically low, but the odds of someone winning are actually quite high. Subconscious cues you don't notice. Let's go back to the coffee shop scenario. You felt someone staring at you, looked up, and they were. Skeptics explain this as subconscious peripheral vision. Your eyes have a field of view far wider than your conscious attention. While you were reading, your peripheral vision detected movement or a change in your environment. Your subconscious registered it as a potential threat or social signal, so it triggered a feeling of being watched, which made you look up. It's not telepathy. It's your visual system working exactly as evolution designed it. The same applies to knowing your partner is upset. You've spent hundreds or thousands of hours with this person. Your brain has learned their baseline behavior so thoroughly that even the tiniest deviation, a slight change in breathing, a microexpression, a shift in posture registers subconsciously. You don't know why you know, but you know. That's not mind reading, that's expertise. The role of probability and memory. Your memory is not a video recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds that memory from fragments, and it's influenced by your current beliefs and emotions. This means that a memory that felt vaguely like a telepathic moment might become more dramatic over time. Details get added. Timing gets sharpened. Ambiguities get resolved in favor of the more interesting interpretation. 10 years later, you remember the time you knew your friend was in trouble, but you've forgotten that you'd been texting them earlier and they'd mentioned being stressed. You've forgotten that they often had trouble around that time of year. You've forgotten context that would make the telepathic moment less mysterious. This is why scientists insist on controlled experiments. Memory is too unreliable to be the sole basis for belief. Why some experiences still demand explanation. Now, having said all of that, there are experiences that don't fit neatly into these explanations. Experiences where the timing is too precise, where the information is too specific, where the person had no way of knowing through normal means. The mother who wakes at the exact moment her child is injured, thousands of miles away. The twin who feels pain in their arms seconds before their sibling breaks theirs. The person who dreams about a friend they haven't seen in decades, with specific details about their current life that later turn out to be accurate. These can't all be dismissed as pattern recognition or confirmation bias. Something else is happening in at least some of these cases. Maybe it's still explicable through conventional neuroscience. Maybe there are information channels we haven't discovered yet. Maybe consciousness operates in ways we don't understand. Or maybe, occasionally, rarely, the boundary between minds is more permeable than we think. The honest position. Here's the intellectually honest position. Most reported telepathic experiences are explainable through normal psychological and neurological processes. Pattern recognition, confirmation bias, subconscious inference, and statistical probability account for the vast majority of cases. But not all. There remains a small percentage of experiences and experimental results that don't fit comfortably into conventional explanations. They're not proof of telepathy, but they're not easily dismissed either. Science is at its best when it remains open to anomalies while maintaining rigorous standards of evidence. We should be skeptical. We should demand proof. But we should also be curious about the edges of human experience that don't quite fit our current models. Because history has shown us repeatedly, the things that seem impossible today become the accepted science of tomorrow. Later, I'm going to share the experiment that even hardened skeptics had trouble explaining away. But first, let me tell you something that will change how you think about your own mind. Telepathy might not be about receiving messages, it might be about reducing noise. Part 7, Can Telepathy Be Trained? Enhancing Perception. If telepathy exists in any form, whether it's true mind-to-mind communication or simply heightened sensitivity to subtle signals, the next question is obvious. Can you improve at it? And the answer, according to both ancient wisdom traditions and modern research, is yes, but not in the way you might think. The noise problem. Think about your mind right now. There's a constant stream of thoughts, worries, plans, memories, judgments, and mental chatter running in the background. It never stops. This is mental noise. Now imagine trying to hear a whisper in a crowded, noisy room. It's nearly impossible. But if the room goes silent, even the faintest sound becomes clear. This is what every meditation tradition, every contemplative practice, every mystical school has understood for thousands of years. To perceive subtle signals, whether from your own intuition, from others, or from the environment, you first have to quiet the noise. Mindfulness, learning to listen. Mindfulness meditation doesn't give you telepathic powers, but it does something important. It trains you to notice what's actually happening in the present moment, rather than being lost in thought. When you practice mindfulness, you become aware of sensations, emotions, and impressions that were always there, but that you were too distracted to notice. You start noticing micro-expressions in faces, subtle shifts in energy when you walk into a room, changes in your own emotional state that signal something about your environment. Research has shown that people who meditate regularly score higher on tests of empathy and emotional recognition. They're better at reading faces, detecting emotional states, and picking up on nonverbal cues. Is this telepathy? No, but it's the foundation for the kind of heightened perception that feels telepathic. Emotional awareness, knowing yourself first. Here's something counterintuitive. To sense what others are feeling, you first have to be deeply attuned to what you're feeling. Most people are disconnected from their own emotional states. They feel anxiety but can't identify its source. They're irritated but don't know why. They're carrying tension they're not even aware of. When you develop genuine emotional awareness, through therapy, journaling, meditation, or other introspective practices, something interesting happens. You start recognizing those same patterns in others. You notice when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes because you've learned to notice when your own doesn't. You sense when someone is masking sadness because you've felt yourself do the same. This is mirror neuron activation enhanced by self-knowledge. You're not reading minds, you're recognizing familiar emotional landscapes. Reducing mental noise, the silence between thoughts. Every contemplative tradition speaks about the power of silence, not just external silence, but internal silence, the gap between thoughts. In that space, where the mental chatter stops, even for a moment, perception changes. You become aware of intuitions that were drowned out by constant thinking. You notice impressions you would have dismissed. You sense connections you would have missed. Indigenous shamans, yogis, monks, and mystics all developed practices designed to access this state. Fasting, sensory deprivation, prolonged meditation, rhythmic breathing, repetitive chanting. These practices aren't superstitious rituals. They're technologies for altering brain states, shifting from beta waves, active thinking, to alpha and theta waves, relaxed awareness, where the brain becomes more receptive. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what ancient practitioners knew. Different brain states access different types of information. Why silence increases intuition. When you're constantly thinking, planning, and analyzing, you're using the brain's executive function network, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is your logical, rational mind. But there's another network, the default mode network. This activates during mind-wandering, daydreaming, and rest. It's the network that makes unexpected connections, draws on pattern recognition, and accesses implicit knowledge, things you know but can't consciously articulate. Intuition emerges from the default mode network. When you quiet your active thinking, you give this network space to operate. This is why solutions to problems often come in the shower, or just before sleep, or during a walk, times when you're not actively trying to think. It's also why many reported telepathic experiences happen during altered states, dreams, meditation, just before falling asleep, during emotional intensity. These are times when the usual mental filters are relaxed. Training perception, practical exercises. There are exercises you can practice that heighten your sensitivity to subtle information. The sensing exercise. Sit with another person in silence. Don't try to read their thoughts. Simply pay attention to any feelings, impressions, or images that arise. After 10 minutes, share what you experienced. You'll be surprised how often your impressions correspond to what the other person was thinking or feeling. This isn't magic, it's learning to notice microcues you usually ignore. The guessing game. Before checking your phone, pause and guess who might be contacting you. Don't take it seriously, make it playful. Over time, you might notice you're right more often than chance would predict. Why? Because you're learning to pay attention to subtle contextual information, who you were just thinking about, who's likely to reach out at this time, patterns in your relationships. Emotional mirroring. When talking with someone, instead of thinking about what you'll say next, try to feel what they're feeling. Match your breathing to theirs. Notice their posture and subtly mirror it. Allow yourself to emotionally resonate with them. This builds empathy and attunement. Dream journaling. Keep a notebook by your bed and write down your dreams immediately upon waking. Over time, you might notice dreams that seem to contain information you couldn't have known, or that correspond to events that later happen. Most won't. But the practice trains you to pay attention to the symbolic language of your subconscious. The important disclaimer. None of these exercises will give you telepathic superpowers. You will not learn to read minds like a comic book character. What you will develop is enhanced perception, greater emotional intelligence, better intuition, stronger empathy. You'll become more sensitive to the information that's always been available, but that you've been too distracted to notice. And occasionally, very occasionally, you might have experiences that feel genuinely telepathic. Moments where you know something you shouldn't be able to know, where the timing is too perfect, where the information is too specific. Most people who develop these practices don't become more certain that telepathy is real. They become more humble about how little they understand about consciousness. The role of connection. Here's the final piece. If telepathy exists in any meaningful way, it seems to require connection. Laboratory experiments with random strangers produce weak, inconsistent results. But people who love each other, who trust each other, who share deep bonds, they report stronger, more consistent experiences. This suggests that telepathy, if it's real, isn't a mechanical process you can turn on and off like a radio. It's a function of relationship. It emerges from intimacy, trust, and emotional attunement. You can't train yourself to be telepathic with strangers, but you can deepen your connections with people you care about, and in doing so, you might find that the boundary between your minds becomes less rigid than you thought. And now, I want to share with you the experiment that made scientists uncomfortable. The one that suggested our brains might be doing something that shouldn't be possible according to everything we know about physics and neuroscience. Part 8. The experiment that changed everything, the uncomfortable truth. We've talked about historical experiments, anecdotal reports, and psychological explanations. But there's one study I haven't mentioned yet, one that's been replicated multiple times, published in peer-reviewed journals, and that still makes mainstream scientists deeply uncomfortable. It's called the presentiment, or pre-feeling experiment, and it suggests that your brain might be reacting to events before they happen. The original discovery. In 1997, psychophysiologist Dean Radin conducted an unusual experiment at the University of Nevada. He wanted to see if the human body could detect emotionally significant events before they occurred. Here's how it worked. Participants sat in front of a computer screen, connected to sensors that measured their skin conductance, a marker of emotional arousal controlled by the unconscious nervous system. They were told they'd be shown a series of random images. Some would be calm and neutral landscapes, household objects. Others would be emotionally arousing, violent scenes, erotic images, disturbing photographs. The computer selected images completely randomly. There was no pattern, no way to predict what would appear next. Participants simply watched and responded. Here's what happened. About 3 to 5 seconds before an emotionally arousing image appeared, participants' skin conductance changed. Their bodies reacted before the image was shown, before they could have consciously known what was coming. When calm images were about to appear, there was no reaction. The effect was small, but it was statistically significant, and it was consistent across multiple trials. The replication problem that wasn't. Skeptics immediately attacked the study. They said it was a fluke, a statistical artifact, probably a mistake in the experimental protocol. So other researchers tried to replicate it. And they succeeded. Dick Bierman in Amsterdam found the same effect. Roland McCready at the HeartMath Institute found it. Patrizio Tresoldi in Italy found it. Julia Mossbridge at Northwestern University conducted a meta-analysis of 26 studies with over 1,000 participants and confirmed the effect. The odds against this being chance, about 1/60 to 1. 26 different studies, in different labs, using different protocols, found the same result. The human body reacts to emotionally significant stimuli before they occur. The implications. This is deeply strange. It suggests that information is flowing backwards in time, that your nervous system is accessing data from the future. Now, before you think this proves telepathy, let me be clear. It doesn't. This is a different phenomenon called precognition or presentiment, but it's related because it suggests consciousness and information don't work the way we think they do. If your brain can detect an event 3 seconds before it happens, what does that say about the nature of time? About causality? About the relationship between consciousness and physical reality? The quantum explanation. Some physicists have proposed explanations based on quantum mechanics. In quantum physics, particles exist in superposition, multiple states simultaneously, until they're observed. The act of observation collapses the wave function and creates a definite outcome. What if consciousness works similarly? What if future events exist in a state of probability until they manifest, and your subconscious mind can detect those probability waves? This sounds like science fiction, but quantum mechanics already violates our common sense understanding of reality. Particles really do affect each other instantaneously across distance. Time really does behave strangely at the quantum level. Maybe consciousness operates on quantum principles we don't yet understand. Or maybe the explanation is simpler, and we just haven't found it yet. Why this makes scientists uncomfortable? The problem with the presentiment effect is that it doesn't fit into any existing scientific framework. If it's real, it means either information can travel backwards in time. The future already exists and can be detected. Consciousness operates outside the normal flow of causality. There's some mechanism of information transfer we haven't discovered. None of these options are comfortable for scientists who work within a materialist, mechanistic framework. So most choose to ignore the research entirely. It's easier to dismiss it as pseudoscience than to grapple with what it might mean. But the data exists. It's been published. It's been replicated. And ignoring it doesn't make it go away. The Gonsfeld effect revisited. Remember the Gonsfeld experiments we talked about earlier? Sensory deprivation, image transmission, hit rates above chance. In 2011, psychologist Darrell Bem at Cornell University published a paper in one of psychology's most respected journals titled Feeling the Future. It described 9 experiments involving over 1,000 participants that showed evidence of precognition. One experiment reversed the typical memory test. Participants were shown a list of words, then tested on which ones they remembered. After the test, they were shown a random selection of the words again for practice. Logically, practicing after the test shouldn't affect the test results. The test already happened. But it did. Participants remembered more words that they would later practice, even though the practice happened after the test. Their memory was influenced by future events. The paper created a firestorm. Skeptics attacked Behm's statistical methods, his experimental design, everything they could think of. Some tried to replicate his work and failed. Others replicated it successfully. The controversy continues to this day. What this means for telepathy. If the brain can detect future events, even weakly and unreliably, it suggests consciousness is not confined to the present moment. And if consciousness can extend forward in time, perhaps it can extend outward in space. Perhaps the boundaries we think exist between minds are more like permeable membranes than solid walls. This doesn't prove telepathy, but it suggests we should be less confident about dismissing it entirely. The final question. So where does all of this leave us? We've explored the history of telepathy, from ancient traditions to modern experiments. We've examined the brain mechanisms that might explain some telepathic experiences. We've looked at famous studies that suggested something real might be happening. We've acknowledged the power of emotional connection and the role of deep bonds. We've explored the skeptical explanations and why most reported telepathy is probably coincidence or subconscious inference. And we've seen that a small but persistent body of scientific research suggests consciousness might be doing things that shouldn't be possible according to our current understanding. The honest answer. Is telepathy real? The honest answer is, I don't know, no one does. What we can say is this. Most reported telepathic experiences have mundane explanations. Pattern recognition, confirmation bias, subconscious cues, emotional attunement, statistical coincidence, these account for the vast majority of cases. But there's a residue of experiences and experimental results that don't fit neatly into those categories. Laboratory experiments show small but statistically significant effects that have been replicated across multiple studies. The effects are weak, they're inconsistent, but they're there. People who love each other deeply report telepathic experiences far more often than chance would predict. These reports are consistent across cultures, throughout history, and can't all be dismissed as delusion or fabrication. The presentiment studies suggest that consciousness might interact with time in ways we don't understand. If that's true, other anomalies become more plausible. And our understanding of consciousness itself is still embarrassingly incomplete. We don't know how subjective experience arises from neural activity. We don't know if consciousness is generated by the brain or received by it. We don't know if minds are truly separate or fundamentally connected at some level we can't detect. What we can be sure of. Here's what we do know. Your brain is far more powerful and mysterious than you've been led to believe. The connections you share with people you love operate through channels deeper than language. Intuition is real, even if it's not telepathy in the traditional sense. Consciousness is not fully explained by current neuroscience, and pretending we understand it completely is intellectual arrogance. The universe is stranger than we think. Quantum mechanics, relativity, dark matter, dark energy, we live in a reality that defies common sense at every turn. Is telepathy really more implausible than particles that exist in two places at once? The practical takeaway. Whether or not telepathy is real in some paranormal sense, you can develop deeper emotional attunement with the people you care about. Learn to trust your intuition and pay attention to subtle signals. Practice mindfulness to quiet mental noise and enhance perception. Cultivate the kind of connection that makes communication, telepathic or otherwise, more effortless. And maybe, just maybe, in moments of deep connection, when your mind is quiet and your heart is open, you'll experience something that feels like more than coincidence. You'll think of someone and they'll call. You'll know something you shouldn't be able to know. You'll feel what someone else is feeling with impossible accuracy. And you won't be able to prove it was telepathy, but you won't be able to dismiss it as chance either. The question that remains, so is telepathy real? Or is the human brain simply far more connected than we understand? Either way, one thing is clear. Your mind is doing far more than you've been told. The boundary between your consciousness and the world around you might be less solid than it appears. And the connections you share with others might extend through dimensions science hasn't yet learned to measure. So pay attention to those moments, the times when you know without knowing why, the feelings that turn out to be right, the connections that feel too deep for words. They might be coincidence. They might be subconscious inference. Or they might be glimpses of something we're only beginning to understand. Something ancient wisdom traditions knew. Something modern science is reluctantly discovering. Something your own experience has been trying to tell you all along. The invitation. Tonight, when you're lying in bed just before sleep, when your mind is quiet and the world is still, try something. Think of someone you love, not casually. Really bring them to mind. Feel them. Imagine you're reaching out across whatever distance separates you, making contact at a level deeper than words. Don't expect anything. Don't strain. Just hold them in your awareness. And see what happens. Maybe nothing, probably nothing. But maybe, just maybe, you'll feel something. Or tomorrow, they'll reach out to you with perfect timing. Or you'll discover that at that exact moment they were thinking of you too. And you'll have to decide for yourself what that means. Because in the end, that's what telepathy research comes down to. Not laboratory results or statistical significance, but personal experience. The moments that feel too meaningful to dismiss. The connections that feel too deep to be chance. The knowing that comes from somewhere beyond thought. Closing. So that's telepathy, not the Hollywood version, not the pseudoscientific fantasy, but the real, complex, mysterious phenomenon that sits at the intersection of psychology, neuroscience, quantum physics, and human connection. We don't have all the answers. We might never have all the answers. But we have enough to know that consciousness is far stranger than we've been taught. Your mind is capable of extraordinary things. And the connection between human beings goes deeper than most of us realize. So the next time you think of someone and they call, don't dismiss it too quickly. Pay attention. Because maybe, just maybe, your brain knows something science hasn't caught up to yet. If this video made you think, made you question, made you curious about the edges of human experience, let me know in the comments. Share your own experiences. Tell me if you felt something you couldn't explain. And remember, whether telepathy is real or not, the mystery of consciousness is worth exploring. Because understanding your own mind is the greatest journey you'll ever take. Thanks for watching. And good night.